can you harness your body's untapped intelligence to stress less, be happier, and achieve more? Welcome to Business Without Barriers, the show bringing you relevant strategies to thrive and succeed in a volatile world, and the show creating a new human story by tapping deeper into our humanity to turn barriers into bridges. I'm your host, Carmen Wild, and my guest is Claire Dale, and she's about to open up her vault and share some of her success treasures with us. Claire is a movement specialist, a leading exponent of physical intelligence and co-author of the book, Physical Intelligence. She's a highly charismatic coach, facilitator, and guest speaker on the topic of achieving peak performance through physical intelligence. With a background in contemporary dance, Claire led her own dance company to European critical acclaim during the 1990s, representing Great Britain in a number of high-profile contemporary dance seasons. She's created works for Sir Paul McCartney, Alsop Architects, CandoCo and L'Oreal. Claire integrated her physical intelligence experience into the world of business by joining the elite team of business coaches at RADA and launching Companies in Motion in 2002 to carry forward her passion for physical intelligence. I bet just as I was when I heard about physical intelligence, you're as curious to know, well, what exactly is physical intelligence? So welcome, a very, very warm welcome to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Carmen. It is great. And hello to all your listeners and viewers. It's really wonderful to be here.
Awesome. And so amazing to have you here talking about a topic that is not top of mind, or maybe, sorry, not top of mind because we're not aware of this amazing topic called physical intelligence. But before we get there, what was the one thing your parents or anyone who knew you when you were a young child that if you were to ask them, what pops to mind about Claire? What would they fondly remember about you?
They would say she came out of the womb dancing and moving. If you could ask me to go from the bedroom to the bathroom to clean my teeth, I would dance there rather than walk there, because why wouldn't you dance everywhere? So movement, they would say, you know, give me a chance to perform in front of anybody, guests coming round for dinner. I would show them my latest creation. From as young as I can remember.
Oh, wow. So it's so amazing when you speak with someone and that passion was already in them at such a young age. I mean, that's such a beautiful gift. Do you still dance to the bathroom, Claire?
I do, you know, and I dance, you know, I dance in the park. Sometimes I'll move, if I'm doing my exercise program, I will often complete that with something a little more free, following my body's instincts to make sure I'm getting the stretches and the moves that I need right at that moment, because prescriptive movement is not always what the body needs. Often it's great to have a discipline and a program, but physical intelligence is so much more than fitness and health. It's about the unification, the understanding that the body, the mind, the emotions are absolutely intrinsically linked. You cannot have a body movement without it having an emotional component and it linking to certain thoughts. And the same applies wherever the first stimulus comes, thoughts, emotions, body, all linked.
So, seeing that you've jumped right there, we're going to go there because this is such a yummy topic. Give us a little bit about what is physical intelligence. You've hinted at it right now. Give it to us in terms of how you would describe this. I just want to, something I read was, you describe physical intelligence as the most important intelligence you probably never heard about. So give it to us.
Okay, so we have this intelligence, this physical intelligence that is highly underused, and yet it underpins our emotional and cognitive intelligences. we can adapt, change, manage, transform our physical state, so our physiology, in order to get more agency and control and whatever we want, creativity, power, focus, in our emotions and our thoughts. So actually, physical intelligence doesn't just sit alongside emotional and cognitive intelligences. What we're really understanding now is it underpins it. It's at this huge influence. And what we've done is we've identified that a great way to think about transforming our physical state, a good way to think about living an aware life, is by tracking the existence and the levels of 8 key chemicals that are racing through our bodies and brains, in our nervous systems, in our bloodstreams. These are neurotransmitters and hormones. And what most people don't really kind of get is that we are under the influence of that chemistry to a great degree. Those chemicals largely dictate how we think, what kind of thoughts we're having in response to a certain situation, how we feel, or what the emotional components are of a certain situation, how we behave and respond and act, how we interact with each other, how we speak. Literally, the pace at which we speak, of course, is a very top level example. But if you speed up when you're nervous, it's because you are under the influence of adrenaline. Adrenaline is the accelerator of the body, of the physiology, and that shows up in our speech. And then it will also show up in the tightness of our vocal cords. And then we're more restricted to run, as I'm doing now. My voice's words are slightly running away with me. And I'm conjuring up, and I can feel it changing my body now, an over-adrenalized state. Yeah, so but when I'm talking to you without that over-adrenalized state, I'm still excited, motivated, passionate. I can still speak quickly, but it isn't that chemical that's making me run away. So that's just a really simple example of how the chemistry is influencing us. And if we don't recognize it, and we don't have techniques or an approach that we can use to recognize, transform, not only in the moment, but over our lifetime. Right. So, talking about my childhood, where we started and dancing to the bathroom, another part of that context when I was very, very young child, and still is that I have a disabled sister who's a year older than me, only a year. And she was my mum's firstborn, and she was born with spina bifida. And she's a wheelchair user. She's a fabulous person. She's very successful. She lives by herself, has a car and a job and so on. She's in fact a civil servant. But what I want to say about that is that 2 things. One is, when we were growing up, the doctors and surgeons were trying to do as much for her as they could. She was quite severely disabled. So she was often very ill, in and out of hospital, huge operations on her spine. And so I was witnessing somebody suffering next to me, my elder sister, who also, of course, I loved. And yet I was dancing everywhere. So my mum was operating with very high cortisol levels, and probably was while I was in the womb, right? And so I got to a very young age worried too much for my mum, for my sister. And then you get a kind of survivor's guilt. I got that anyway, because my body was so functioning, and expressive, and Gillian's was so challenged. So, that was one of the things that and when I started to look into the chemistry, I realized that high cortisol, worry and anxiety had been in my domain since I was very, very young. And part of my own personal journey was to learn to, redesign my chemistry and exchange those chemicals of threat with other chemicals of, vitality and self-esteem and sense of power and control.
Wow, what an incredible story. Thanks for sharing that, because it's given such a nice context. The polarity of those two experiences and what is happening in the body, and the way you've spoken about redesigning our chemistry. So that gives us a better understanding of what's going on. When you're speaking about physical intelligence, we're actually talking about the chemistry that is happening that we've actually just totally oblivious to. We feel it, but we haven't been taught how to name it, label it, experience it, change it, redesign it. So just to provide a little bit more context, maybe you can give us an idea of some of the more detrimental physical unintelligent habits we see, because that would give us just a little bit of understanding of, when we understand the problems this having physical intelligence could solve, I think it'll open up our minds and awareness more to it.
Yeah. Okay, so classically would be, working all day, hardly taking a break, starting the day, having had an okay sleep, so you kind of get into gear and then adrenaline keeps you going, but actually not taking any recovery time at all during the day. Even on a bathroom break, the brain just whirring and getting back to the desk and then carrying on with all those urgent things or things that, that other people are calling us to do, or that are on our agenda that we feel we really must do. And therefore getting to the end of the day, having drained our adrenals too much and unnecessarily because of the way that we're working. And so then at the end, as you recover, your recovery time is spent feeling fatigued, collapsed, like nothing left in the tank. So that means that then our leisure time is trying to dig ourselves out of this exhaustion from having worked too hard. I'm all for hard work, right? But it's how we work. Mm-hmm. And that can be because when we get going, we're getting going with too high levels of cortisol in the system. So when cortisol is too high, then we produce more and more adrenaline, and we'll get going with whatever we have to do with more like feelings of frustration, anxiety, and worry. And when we recover, we'll be fatigued and collapsed. Whereas, and here's some chemistry, if whatever we're doing that day, if we can get going with more DHEA in the tanks. Now that's DHEA, dehydroepiandrosterone. Look, there are only 8 chemicals in our framework, and that's the one with the longest word, the longest name. You don't need to remember the long name, but just think DHEA, vitality, stamina, deep energy reserves in the tanks. And the thing about DHEA is it's a performance enhancing steroid. The synthetic version is a banned substance for Olympic athletes. It's that powerful. But guess what? We can make it every day in our adrenal glands, just in the back here. We can fill those levels of DHEA using various techniques, physical intelligence techniques, starting with breath pattern, and then going on to how we use the muscular system around our bones, whether we're in the grip of tension or whether we're able to flow and release, and so on and so on. There are so many different, and certain types of thought will bring either cortisol up or DHEA up. So starting to tune in to how we're doing things, not just that we're getting going and then recovering, but how are we getting going? Are we getting into our tasks with enthusiasm, motivation, passion? And then when we recover, are we able to be content, curious, resourced, and enjoy the times when we're going to renew our energy and be with our families and play with the kids and whatever else we might do? So that's the whole chemistry. So that's just, really that applies to everything, doesn't it? How we do hard work, how we focus. What else? Diet, does of course impact our cortisol levels. If we've got high carbohydrate, high sugar diet, many of your listeners and viewers will already know this, but that creates an acidic environment in the rest of the body. The stomach needs to be acidic, but the rest of the body should be alkali. And carbohydrate diets, sugars, and so on, if we're too high in those things, they will raise our cortisol levels. Living a life where we don't reward ourselves enough, like get to Friday and be able to register, gosh, I achieved that and that and that this week, and that and that and that and that. And if you think of it and you get to the end of the week, you've probably actually done a lot, rather than getting to the end of the week and looking at what you didn't do that was on your frankly endless to-do list. So there's these habits about how we support our own performance by managing our dopamine system, our reward and pleasure system. And unless we keep score of the good stuff, as well as note the things that we still want to achieve, that links exactly to the DHEA and cortisol balance, and also to the so if we've got enough DHEA in the tanks, then we're naturally using our dopamine systems, our pleasure and reward systems, much more wisely. Now, dopamine gets a bad name because it often is associated with addiction, but there's a real good flip side to dopamine. It is actually what motivates us to, if we're hungry, to go and pick an apple off a tree. It's literally the chemical that makes us step to the tree, look at it, take the apple, open our mouth, bite into it. And then the pleasure we get, if it's a good apple, makes us want to go and look for other apples and share those apples with other people. It's our dopamine system. So it's the great motivator if used wisely.
Wow, this is fascinating. Really, really fascinating. And it's just shows how important awareness is, because if we were aware of these chemicals and what's going on in our bodies, we'd be approaching everything that we do so differently. Because just as you were speaking, my mind was racing in terms of how I do those things and how I approach things, and how with the tiniest little tweaks, our days and weeks could go differently. Yeah. So if we've given the downside some, habits that are more detrimental. Talk to us, or maybe you can give us a little case study of someone maybe that you've worked with that pops to mind and came in fatigued, and whatever it is might be that they came in with. You help them with some techniques, and this is who bounced out afterwards. Yeah. If you could give us something like that, just to again create the context.
All right. Well, there's so many examples, and so many examples in the book as well, if people want to pick up the book. But the one that springs to mind is a wonderful woman. She was very high up in a financial infrastructure company here in Europe, and she was a mum of 2 boys, and she came into a series of 6 coaching sessions with me, complaining of really feeling, a whole range of things. Guilt for not being there, leaving the house at 6:30, 7 a.m. to get into London. She lived outside London. And then, not getting home till 7, 8 in the evening. So there was that guilt about the 5-day week, the working mum. I'm sure, there are listeners out there who will identify with that. And I think even women who've really come to terms with it may always feel a tiny bit of regret. Maybe for someone it's just going to be natural because there is that choice there. But she really hadn't come to terms with it at that stage. And her guilt was really impacting her whole gut area. So I'm going to get up now because I probably will show you an exercise. I'm bashing my chair around there. She really felt, and she was suffering from a bit of IBS, and this central area of her body was so locked in. There was often pain there. And so the first thing that we really did was to get the breath going into the abdomen so she could start to breathe and then actually feel the weight of this emotion. Emotions are chemicals, by the way. They are neuropeptides that are released in the body and in the brain, and they get locked into receptor cells in our bodies, which is how come we feel something like guilt, which we cognitively name, we feel it in our bodies, and that's how it impacts our physiology. So she had a lot of locked in neuropeptides into receptor cells all through the gut. And this was bringing her serotonin levels down. So we make 95% of our serotonin in our guts. There are 100 million neurons in our guts. So, and some of their job is to release serotonin, which is our self-esteem, self-belief, status, expansion chemical. It allows us to flow and feel well in the world, well-being, happiness. And you'll know if you're not feeling well, you're more like this, aren't you? And if you are feeling well or not threatened by others and good in the world, then you tend to be expansive and your thoughts are more expansive rather than narrow. So she had all this going on, and actually, after working a little bit on the breath, and then she took away some breath practice that was associated with just releasing the chemistry of guilt. Then we also just worked very simply and slowly on a twisting action, a little bit like this, wrapping the hand around, twisting, breathing. Imagining her gut sort of being able to stretch and move, and then coming back, same thing the other side, and then stretches that go into the torso and let the tissue around the gut, the muscles around the ribs and the abdomen really stretch and open up so that she got some more space. And if any listeners want to do this with me now, just even after a few, like 10 seconds of stretching the side of the body, and it looks a bit like a dance move as well, doesn't it? But then you stretch when you breathe, and then when you come back, and if you've only done one side of the body, that side of the body feels so much more expansive than the other side. It's like there's a different set of emotions in the body on one side to the other, isn't there? So Carmen, you can even yourself up if you want to do the other side quickly, just so you're not lopsided. So this was space. This was creating space for her. Just move my stool back to sit down. This is creating space for her to be herself, to make her decisions, to not feel guilty, to have a right to work, to know that she was doing, the choices she'd made were the right choices for her. And through it, she was giving her sons the opportunity to learn independence. She was an incredibly loving mum, racing home to get them the bedtime story and really with them at weekends, preparing lovely lunches for them. She really loved them, and they felt it. So, that's one example. And on LinkedIn, I just see that she's going from strength to strength in her career now. And I know the boys are grown up now. And this was a few years ago. But that was just a lovely example, I think, that really encapsulates something that many women particularly are going through. And through working with the body rather than only talking coaching, she literally started to be this woman that was free and empowered to be a great mum, as well as a breadwinner. She was earning much more than her husband, and they relied on that.
That is, it's so, that's why I love these conversations, because it kind of puts a different spin on movement and exercise. And I'm sure we would approach exercise and movement differently if we had the awareness of what it's creating in our body. I mean, the fact that you can create a few simple movements and remove the feeling of guilt, that's very powerful, because that's so doable. That is like, wow, is that what I need to do to feel better? Move a little bit, and within seconds, I'm feeling balanced. That's very, very powerful. So I'd like us to maybe go a little bit more into it, because I think this is such a practical thing. You can make it theoretical, but I think the more practical we make it, the better it will be in terms of the awareness. Tell us a little bit about the 4-part strategy that you talk about in your book, and then I'd love us to go into some practical stuff around those.
Okay, great. All right. So what we found was that all of the techniques that over many years, being a dancer, being artistic director of my own contemporary dance company and so on, all the things that you mentioned, all the techniques that I'd drawn from that period of my life and from other people, sports people, high performers that I knew and we interviewed for the book, led to hundreds of techniques. And actually, once we started to sort through them, they fell naturally into 4 elements that had their own chemistry. So we looked at, the research is well researched, all of the techniques have research behind them, and we could see which types of technique were boosting the strength chemistry or the flexibility chemistry. So strength, flexibility, resilience, and endurance. Those are the 4 elements that underpin the physical intelligence curriculum. Strength is risk tolerance, confidence, deep emotional and mental stability, as well as of course it all links to our physical stability, our core strength, our groundedness, so that we can hold ground in high pressured situations, keep a cool head under pressure, so that we can take risks whilst mitigating them. We know what we're doing with risk. And so that we can be with others, lead others, without feeling that we need to dominate or threaten others, or feeling threatened ourselves. Okay, so that's strength. And the chemical cocktail for strength includes a good dose of testosterone, which women and men both need. It's not only men that need testosterone. And for women who are of a certain age and getting older, and for men of a certain age, we all need to keep our adrenals functioning well, because a testosterone, those hormones are also made in the adrenals. So good dose of testosterone, right? Power, control, strength, risk tolerance, and learning to keep those cortisol levels that I've mentioned at an optimal level. So we've got skin in the game, we care, we're ready to put our energy in, but we're not going to choke. We're not going to start to get those anxious voices in the head that impede our performance when the pressure's on. And then the third chemical in the strength cocktail, if you're all following me, is dopamine. And we talked a bit about dopamine as the reward and pleasure chemical and the picking the apples. But that of course, as you can see, that makes us goal oriented and gives us, literally releases energy to make us move towards things that we feel are important. So that's the strength field element. Flexibility, well, that's obviously all about our ability to adapt to changing circumstances and environments, to creatively problem solve, look at things from different angles, to work really well with other people, especially people who are very different in style, how they use their energy and character to us, in personality, so that we can really understand others' agendas. Everything to do with influence can come into flexibility, and how we create those relationships that we can understand, how we can understand others, see each other's, stand in others' shoes, that kind of thing. So that's flexibility. And the chemistry of flexibility is what we call upping the odds for success. Because if you've only got strength, you can become blinkered. If you've only got flexibility, your life can become ill-defined, and you're not, you tend to get distracted. So upping the odds for success stands for, it's ODDS. So that's oxytocin, dopamine, DHEA, and serotonin. That's the cocktail for flexibility. Now, we've talked about some of those chemicals already, but the one that's new in the mix is oxytocin, which is our social bonding and trust chemical. It's actually often in the press on Valentine's Day, because we go off the spectrum, off the scale when we fall in love with oxytocin, or when we have a child. But in normal everyday life, oxytocin is released when I deliver a project on time to you, or I do what I say I'm going to do, or I respond in a way to you if you've got a problem that feels like it's supportive and understanding, or I communicate in such a way as you feel that your status is upheld and you feel comfortable and you feel that you've got room to move. So that's oxytocin. Then we know the others. Dopamine, not only is it goal orientation, but it's also creativity, connections through the brain and the visual cortex of the brain. So dopamine is multi-functional. DHEA, you know about, vitality. And that, of course, you can't have creativity and so on without a nice strong foundation of your strength. And then serotonin, we already learnt about that. And one thing just to say about flexibility that's really important is that if you're inflexible in your body, you'll be less flexible in your mind creatively. So that's a fact. We know about that, which is why stretching and keeping mobile is so important, especially when we're spending hours in our own home offices or wherever we're working in front of a screen, because serotonin, it's the movement chemical. It has an important part to play on the suppleness of the connective tissue between muscle and bone. So if our serotonin is low, that connective tissue gets brittle and we start to feel more stiff. And that's associated with cortisol being too high. Serotonin being too low, cortisol too high is when there's lots of stiffness and pain and muscle tension and connective tissue tension in the body. So that's why movement and flexibility in the body is so important, not only strength training, but flexibility training, because it literally balances the chemicals and allows us into a much more creative, expansive mindset. So that's two elements. Gosh, I'm going into detail here. But
it's wonderful. It's amazing, because it just gives us an amazing awareness. So keep going.
Keep going. Okay. The third one then, if you remember, is resilience. And many people use the term resilience to include everything that we're talking about in the whole curriculum. But we have created them into defined buckets because then they're much easier to work on. So if you're working on strength and flexibility, that's going to accumulate to help your resilience. And likewise, all of the other three will help your endurance. So it's all cumulative. So resilience is our bounce back from adversity. We all know that. Be able to sort of bounce positively into the future by using a learning mindset. Again, that's very familiar. Carol Dweck's work on learning mindset is the most positive way to live life. Whatever's happening to me, however uncomfortable I feel, and every time I apply a physical intelligence technique to that and make my way out of a difficult moment, because we all have them. We all have emotional ups and downs and stuff that's happening. Otherwise, we wouldn't be inviting any risk into our life at all. Yeah. And we'd expect to get the life to stay the same. Well, if we're not doing new things, we won't feel any of those fluctuations of, oh, I really succeeded at that, oh, I failed a bit at that. You know, this is all completely natural. But the question is, you know, how do we approach it cognitively? What impact is that having on our emotions and our mental state? So learning mindset, whatever happens, I'm going to take a big dose of serotonin from that, whatever happens, because I'm going to learn from it. And the minute you go, that wasn't very pleasant, wasn't it? What am I learning? And then you write it down, suddenly you own the experience and your serotonin levels start to go back up and you feel you can expand into the world again. And you get yourself out of a self-esteem problem, self-worth problem, self-value problem. Most of our resilience drain comes from circular thoughts, ruminations, a sort of worry or doubt that we're not showing up good enough because that didn't go as it. I should be perfect. So, people who head towards burnout, a high percentage of people who end up with very severe burnout's a very severe condition of adrenal fatigue. The majority have a perfectionist streak. Which is why it's so difficult for parents at the moment who are homeschooling, trying to be brilliant friends and parents to their kids and give them everything and do everything and do it perfectly. It's just not possible.
Yes.
So
exactly.
The more resilient parents are the ones that are not expecting perfection, but they're actually able to flow and go, do you know what, let's just let go of that today. Yeah. So resilience. Endurance is fascinating. Endurance, because we tend to think of endurance athletes as going through enormous pain, you know, to get there. But actually, you know, my brother has done Ironman competitions and things, and he gets a lot of joy from it as well. You're training yourself persistently. So with the right training in place, the marathon is doable, and you know how to do it, and you know how to cadence your run. Rather than, you know, doing a few runs in preparation and expecting yourself to run 26 miles. That's usually when people criticize their own endurance. It's when there hasn't been enough preparation, planning, structure, and therefore step-by-step approach to determination and being well prepared to succeed, knowing your goal, milestones, and structure. These are the kind of things that underpin our endurance. And so in physical intelligence terms, it would be, you know, being very good at bolting in habits that are right for the thing that you're training for, or the goal that you hold at that moment. And then once they aren't working as well, you've got a bunch of other techniques, you know, that you draw from your resilience, which is your resources, into your endurance, which gives you options to sort of train in a different way because the goal has changed.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and underlying, so, you know, underlying resilience is all about keeping those cortisol levels optimal and being able to unleash all of the other chemicals as and when they're needed, and having access to the whole cocktail. Endurance is, again, really relies on that underlying DHEA, because that creates this, we call it an endurance tunnel. You know, when you're going through a tough time, you've got to work hard, and hopefully you've planned it. But what you don't want is the walls of the tunnel to sort of collapse in on each other, so you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. So it's a well-used metaphor, isn't it? That sort of, I'm working towards something, I want to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And DHEA is like the brickwork that keeps the tunnels open. Literally, there's enough strength and stamina in the tanks to be able to keep stepping forward. And then what really is important is that dopamine. Dopamine to be able to see the bright future. Dopamine to want to be motivated to do difficult, tough things. Dopamine that will keep you stepping forward at times when the tunnel might feel slightly narrower, but you know how to focus on the goal. And if the goal starts to look unrewarding, you know you're skillful at focusing on the next milestone. And you know what motivation really is, which is stuff that has purpose and works for the world around you as well as for yourself. So then you see how if you add oxytocin into the endurance chemical as well, you've got a world view where you're not going for that goal only through greed and need, but you're going for that goal because you have you're socially connected as well, and you've got the personal motivation and the social connections, and you've got an endurance in which oxytocin and dopamine are well balanced.
Wow.
And you can imagine what kind of world that creates if we're thinking about, you know, the richest people in the world and how somehow that richness is ending up in people with billions in the bank and not using it well enough to support, you know, modern day slavery and commerce and how we do these things. So, you know, there's a big story here. It's not just about the body, it's about how we live life and how we live life in the best way for sustainable organization, sustainable world and planet, and sustainable people.
That last sentence is like the cherry on top, because I was trying to formulate a sentence and you said it beautifully, because as you went through the strength, flexibility, resilience, and endurance, the images going through my mind was also, this is so rich. This is so much substance involved, and as kids should be taught about this chemistry surging through them. So what would be really nice then is, and maybe we can use you as an example, because I'm sure you over the years have developed a really amazing cocktail mix to keep up your strength and flexibility, resilience, and endurance. Give us an idea in the life of someone that is aware and the kind of things you do from the moment you wake up, and so your approach. If you would be okay with sharing your approach through the day to keep these chemistry really optimal.
Okay, so I've trained myself, you know, as soon as I am conscious, and maybe even when I'm sort of subconscious and coming out of sleep, I've trained myself to fall into a very regular breath pattern. So it's called paced breathing. And it's so entrained now that I almost don't need to, I don't really need to think about it. I just become aware so often that that's what I'm doing. But for any viewers and listeners that haven't spent much time thinking about breathing, actually on waking, if you can find a pattern of in-breath and out-breath that you count gently in the back of your mind, so 4 in, 4 out, or 4 in, 5 out, or 3 in, 6 out, whatever rhythm, whatever repetitive rhythm feels right, and make that breath pattern smooth and fairly slow, then you start the day by boosting DHEA. And we know from research that paced breathing is the place to start to get that wonderful performance enhancing steroid into your body. So I do that all the time. If you're not practiced at it, do 5 minutes. Actually get up, you know, wake up, get your phone or your clock or whatever you have, and just give yourself a 5-minute timer or a little timer, 5 minutes, and then get up. And by the way, you can integrate breath pattern work when you're cooking the dinner, preparing lunch, preparing a pot of coffee. If you have a bathroom break, just use that as a trigger. So it's all about using the things that you do to trigger physical intelligence techniques, and latching the physical intelligence onto things that you always do is a good way to get some really good habits and awareness built in. The next thing I do is I'm aware of tension in my body. So usually as I sort of swing my legs out of bed, or I persuade my husband to go and get a cup of tea, you know, get us a cup of tea or whatever it is, depending on how leisurely the morning is, I'll do what we call an MOT, map of tension. And I will just tune in and say, right, okay, how was I sleeping? What's talking to me today in my body? And I'll just have a little chat with my body, or where, you know, what do you need? You know, or maybe there's an area of tension. Maybe it's the shoulders. I seem to have been thinking very hard about something, processing something when I was asleep, and the shoulders feel locked. And so, you know, I'll just find the little movements, you know, maybe a sort of specific movement that I've developed that I know really works for me. Sometimes it's the lymph glands that get stiff and create neck and shoulder tension, because we've got the thyroid here, we've got lymph nodes all around here, and that can all get very locked. So I'm aware of lymph drainage, toxin drainage being important as well. And then whilst I'm doing those movements, I just let the body talk to me. I say, what do you need today? And it will say to me, just let the shoulders rest. You don't need so much adrenaline today, Claire. Let's just sit. Let's just sit in serotonin. So breath, MOT, those are two must-haves, just integrated naturally into my day. I will tend to, then I will at some point in my morning, either straight away or once I've got going, I will do a run with my dog in the park. And I will do a yoga, sort of enhanced yoga routine that I've, you know, it's a mix of things that I just work for me. And it has different elements in it, a little bit for strength, a little bit for flexibility, a little bit for endurance, a little bit for resilience, a little bit for endurance. So I've just built that in. And then sometimes because I'm a dancer, I don't really mind what people think of me in terms of how I
Brilliant.
move. And anyway, I really subscribe to this wonderful saying, and I cannot remember where it came from, but what other people think about me is none of my business.
I love that.
What other people think of me is none of my business. That doesn't mean I don't have a responsibility to behave well, but I'm not in control of that. So I like to then, so my final bit, and I sometimes do this, is just to give myself a little bit of free movement, just to move as my body wants, you know, and it's unstructured. It's not a particular exercise. It's not the plank. It's not the salute to the sun or downward dog or whatever. It's actually just it's just movement. Sometimes I have music on. Maybe some listeners and viewers do this, you know, in the kitchen, like you dance like no one's watching when your favorite piece of music is on.
Yeah.
And it's similar, right? And when as soon as we move in a way that is spontaneous, unplanned, making it up as we go along, the research from the University of Hertfordshire here in the UK shows us that we become better at divergent thinking. So spontaneous free movement makes better creative connections and lets us look at problems from different angles, expansive, zoomed out, or zooming in. Yeah, whereas structured movement gives us better convergent thinking, making one decision out of many options. And the other thing to note, and this is a chemical that has come into the fore really just in the last couple of years, even since we finally put the final manuscript in. So in our revised edition, we will include this chemical, but it's called irisin. And the scientists are calling it the hope molecule. And that kicks in as soon as we move our bodies. We become, it's a protein that's released in the muscles and it crosses the blood-brain barrier and it goes into the brain, into sites in the brain where we know this is about optimism and hope. And if you think about it, if someone's very injured, if there's no movement, it's likely that they're dead or near dead.
Yeah.
When we see movement, it means there's life. We feel that life. So you only need to extrapolate that a bit to almost a philosophy about how we move our bodies, that when I move, you know, it's not Barack Obama while we breathe, we hope. It's when while we breathe and move, there's hope. And if we know that, then we can feel it. And if we feel it, then we know it. And if we know it, then we can feel it. And it creates a virtuous cycle rather than going, oh, I hope I'll feel hopeful today.
Yeah.
I hope
Wow.
I'll wake up feeling hopeful.
Yeah, that's very powerful. That, you know, it's like movement is literally life, and it amplifies hope, gives us hope. So it's just everything that you're talking about has just, for me, sort of awakened the notion of we've just been taught exercise in the wrong way. Yeah. If we were given, you know, the way in which you've been fueling us actually through your explanations, and even just your dance with your expressions and the way your free movement, it just puts a completely different spin on why we need to move. And that you don't have to necessarily run a marathon or do an hour in the gym. It's actually movement the whole day, and being aware of those little things that you can do. This really such useful information. Thanks, Claire. Maybe give us something that you end the day off with.
Oh yes, that's right, we were doing a day plan, weren't we? So sometimes, I mean, I'm 57 now, right? So sometimes my sleep pattern is broken, even though I'm following all the sleep protocols, because, you know, there may be a hot flush or just a broken sleep pattern. And it's something that women of my age have to live with. But what I do is, I make sure I've got enough recovery during the day. And I've always been working on this because I'm a real driver. I love to put my energy in, and I can really use that energy. So I just taught myself, you know, really to use bathroom breaks, to make sure that there's something in there, you know, a half an hour where I'm going to eat some good, nutritious, light food at lunchtime. And so I put in recovery time. So, and in those recovery times, I'm just allowing serotonin to fill up, cortisol to lower. I'm allowing breath to come into my body, DHEA tanks to fill up. And also I might well start to say to myself, and I usually do this multiple times a day, you're going to have a beautiful sleep tonight, Claire. Beautiful sleep tonight. And I know that for me, you know, whilst we're in lockdown and I can't go to the theatre or to a dance performance or any of the things that I love to do or meet friends out, you know, my husband he cooks for me because I just tend to be very busy. So he'll cook great food. And then he's just starting to choose a movie for us so that we don't get too addicted to Netflix, right? Although, I mean, I just feel so lucky to have the whole range of you know, good quality television that we have right now in lockdown, because that can become a pleasure point and a reward, as long as it doesn't tip into 3, 4, 5, 6 episodes or something, which we just try and limit. And all the time I'm thinking, this is my reward from a hard day's work. And then Claire, you're going to have a beautiful sleep tonight. And you know, more often than not, I do, because that's I'm setting my body up to expect that, and I'll wind my breathing down. So wind down breathing is great as you start to go towards the end of the day, starting to slow your breath pattern down on purpose. So you can let go of the rhythmic ratio, and then you breathe in for 1 and out for 1. And then you breathe in for 2, 1, 2, and out for 2, 1, 2. And then you go for 3 and you stretch the breath out.
That's literally putting me to sleep, Claire.
3 and then out. And, you know, sometimes you'll be able to 5, sometimes to 7, but you're starting to imitate, and even someone talking about it, that's essential. You're imitating the rhythm of a really deep, relaxed, deep sleep. And so that's a great tip if you find that you've got a bit wired, you know, and I know, and I'm sure others will relate to this, but if you look at emails and something's come in just before you go to bed, it's a totally different kettle of fish sleep.
Exactly. That has been so, I mean, educational is not even the right word. It's very powerful information you're sharing with us. And I'm so grateful that you've written a book because I'm halfway through the book and it's so filled with stuff that you actually have to literally stop and do it as you're going along to absorb all of it. Thank you for this, Claire. It's really been a treat to listen to how much control we actually have on so many levels just by being aware of what's going on in our bodies and literally talking to ourselves through the day and feeling it so we can adjust as we go along. So thank you so much for that. It's I really want to encourage everyone listening, watching to buy the book. It's called Physical Intelligence, and it's just jam-packed with techniques and little tools, and they're all simple. They really are simple tools that will just give us life, basically. I want to digress from this subject but you are all physical intelligence, but there's more of your passions as well that I just want to touch on a little bit. I want to talk about, because this show is so much about bringing our humanity into what we do and how that impacts us so much. You have what's very close to your heart is this movement against modern day slavery, which is really a really fascinating, interesting, well, something that you're, what would I call it? A cause that you're part of. And how rife is this? Yeah, I'm taking a complete digression away from this, but this is a fascinating, because it's part of who you are and what you believe in. How rife is something like this in our world?
Well, I mean, quite shockingly, in the UK, there could be as many as 130 odd thousand people who are in some way in enslaved conditions, not being given a living wage, or they're not being treated in a way that is respectful, and that's a shocking number for a civilized first world country. I'm working closely with an incredible young woman called Nazreen Sheikh at the moment, and she has an organization called the Empowerment Collective. She's Nepalese, and she has escaped modern day slavery, forced marriage, working in a sweatshop, creating clothes for goodness knows how many of the big commercial brands, and literally putting her blood and sweat and tears into pieces of clothing that she will never be associated with having created. They will have a high price tag, they will be unrecognizable, and she and the other people in the sweatshop will have suffered to make those clothes. So I've recently started to work with her. She now lives in America, goes back to Nepal, has projects there. She set up centers for women who are disadvantaged. Women's rights are very compromised in Nepal on the whole, and she set up centers where people, which are built on the UN principles, and living wage, clean water, good food, and a use of materials that doesn't impact the environment. I mean, really amazing. She's even organized. I mean, when she was 18, she took a loan and got these centers going for these incredibly disadvantaged women who then flourish.
Wow.
And the thing is, if you have no education and you're in a threatening situation, you can't conceive of anything else. Your cognitive function doesn't see a way out and can't feel that there's anything else. And therefore, developmentally, you're not able to contribute. The humanity in you just is not recognized by anyone. And Nazreen managed to find a way. She's got an amazing story, and I'm helping her write that story now, which for her is processing many traumatic events and helping her to more and more, she's standing on the world stage and talking about modern day slavery and campaigning for a living wage, food, water, you know, the basics, shelter and education, which, you know, millions of people all over the world do not have. So I've always wanted to do more with charity. And in fact, it's just in the, I've done some things and been on a few boards of arts companies and things, but I've been waiting for my charitable work to really flourish. And I don't know, it just comes, so these things come at the right time. And I guess I've got enough time and I'm well supported and we're successful. So I can, you know, focus some of my energies on a cause. And this is one that, I just feel, you know, if we had more oxytocin in our practices and less high cortisol, high dopamine and high testosterone, that's the cocktail of greed, need, then I think that we'd be able to help, you know, able to create a world where, you know, we could wipe out hunger and poverty. There's plenty of food around. We just need to apply our ingenuity to it and help, and not judge people in third world countries as not clever, not smart, not capable, because they don't find their way out of poverty. It's a chains. It's like being in a prison cell. If you're living, scraping a living, eating dirt. Nazreen will tell you, she was so hungry, she kind of, sometimes she just filled her stomach with dirt, grime from the ground. Sure. Right? It's extraordinary.
And it's absolutely, we cannot judge, because just like all our behaviors and our habits are sometimes detrimental to us because of a lack of awareness. That's all it is, actually. When we're not aware of what's available to us and what we can do, we resort to what we do know. And if what we do know is little, then that's the best that we can do with what we know. So, but it's so amazing that even though your physical intelligence in something like this is so different, I see the connection, because it's movement again. It's both a movement that needs to take place when you involved in causes like this, and wow, the mind boggles in terms of you being able to create the awareness of what people in these situations can do if they knew about physical intelligence. Because as they are part, you know, privy to all these circumstances, imagine what they could do just within their own body and their spaces, even if it's confined, to enhance the chemistry, at least in their bodies, and to lift themselves out of that confined situation, and which would give hope. What was that hope molecule? Irisin.
Irisin, yeah. Irisin. I mean, I think what I'm learning is that extreme poverty it is a prison cell where, you know, finding hope, you know, having anything other than cortisol, threat, you know, and the brain is the brain development, the neuronal patterns of that threatened mind literally mean that you probably can't have a thought that finds yourself to maybe one day, or how could I help myself? Yes. It's just too bad. And you know, this is happening in states where there are many rich people in Kathmandu who know that there are people in politics, corrupt politics, who know that there are this poverty at village level. There are murders, there are deaths, there's violence against women, incredibly so, and of course many malnourished and unhappy men as well. It's just, you know, these people need help, you know, to have the resources of the world shared with them, and you know, politics, society, structure. You know, we are in a society. We are only, I believe, that we're only as successful as the degree to which our most vulnerable people thrive. That's what I believe. And yeah, you know, I mean, that's why the more people that buy the physical intelligence book, and the more people that sort of help us really get this message out, the more we can, you know, we can in our, you know, the way that we want to give back, we can give more and more to these important projects. So that's really part of the vision is, you know, I really, really do not want to have millions and billions of pounds. I honestly, I like to live well, but I mean, it's much more to do with what could one do with, you know, enhanced wealth. And I think that's the way we all need to be thinking. Any wealth anywhere is only to be done, to be used to create, you know, a better world, I think.
Yes,
because the money's not yours. It's not really ours. It's taken from resources that belong to everyone.
I totally agree. I mean, we're at the end of the day, we're actually only as valuable as the value that we share and create. And there's enough in the world to go around, and it's just a travesty not to share that, not to uplift, not to create these movements, and to give what we've received in more privileged societies or environments, to just, and it doesn't even take a lot. That's the sad thing here. It's a little bit of time, a little bit of awareness, a little bit of skill that we need to share. Thank you, Claire. You've moved me by talking about all this movement. And one last question: if you were to share a message close to your heart, and something really, really deeply meaningful to you, a message you really wanted to share with the world, what would that message be?
I think that it will be connected with oxytocin, this important chemical that I've been talking about. And the message is, be aware that your heart muscle contains neurons that release oxytocin. So when you think about opening your heart, don't think of that as a woolly, fluffy statement that's all about love and peace and is back in some kind of more ancient approach. This is a modern day hardcore approach to the world. And if you close your body, you shut down the neurons around the heart and the surrounding tissue. Whereas if you open your body, breathe, you can literally feel the oxytocin releasing, and various other knock-on chemicals that literally expand the body. They make us feel more expansive, and that means that we've got a bigger heart, and we can see and know that we're going to do good work around us. So do good work, release oxytocin in your own chest, your own heart, and know that that's in your hands. It's not something somebody else can give you.
Thank you. That's beautiful. And thank you for sharing your magnificent work with us. It's such powerful insights, and so necessary with all the stuff going on in our world today and the many challenges that are extra challenges on top of everything that went before. Such amazing insights. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your beautiful heart and sharing that with us. And may you continue to create this movement that brings life. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you, Carmen, for your heart and soul in this work as well.
Thank you. To all of those of you watching and listening, thank you for sharing with us today. And I think to sum it up is bring heart. Just open up your heart to the insights that are around you. And we've heard movement is life. And where you are able to help to move others in some special, small way or meaningful way, do that. So let's move, because that's life. Until next time, lots of love.